want to bring in right now Donald Trump Presidential Campaign Senior Policy Advisor, Stephen Miller. Stephen, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
What about this delegate situation? I mean, clearly on the Democratic side of the race with Hillary Clinton's superdelegates, it seems that people are questioning the fairness of it.
A lot of people are learning for the first time just how much the delegate system is in some ways disenfranchising of voters, and you can't think of a more dramatic example of that than what happened in Colorado. I mean, you have Ted Cruz, who styles himself, I guess more recently, as a man of the people, crowing about a delegate win in the state that canceled, I repeat, canceled its election. There was not an election in Colorado.
And yet, the delegates went to Cruz.
And, you know, I mean, just to give a sense of the magnitude of this, think about this as an example. Let's say that you're a soldier in Colorado who served overseas in Iraq to provide Iraq with a safe and secure election, right? Remember everyone with the purple fingers a few years back. That same soldier, let's say that she returns to Colorado, having given Iraqis an election. That soldier in Colorado, she can't vote for who she wants to be her president.
Right.
Cruz should be demanding an election in Colorado if he really is a man of the people.
Taken.
But, Stephen, if you're running for the presidency of the United States, you know this going in. And it does seem like, now, with the hiring of Paul Manafort and getting the campaign together, that the Trump campaign was not prepared for this. That's not the candidate that he's put out there. He's the leader, he's the CEO, but he didn't have his ducks in a row up until recently.
Well, there's two separate questions. One question is, should there be an election? Should one person have one vote? The Trump campaign says yes. The Cruz campaign says no. Then there's a second question of, okay, operating within a system where people don't vote, what kind of strategy should you have? And obviously, we're going to do the very best we can
to pick up as many delegates as we can. Stephen, you should have said that last year when he started running, saying, hey, we're getting it before the primaries and the caucuses ever started, right?
Yeah, Stephen, it doesn't work that way.
But here's the bigger context, in that, is that Donald Trump has already, beyond anyone's wildest dreams, defied any expectation somebody could have set for a candidacy. He's up against the donors, the special interests, many in the media, many in the party, many in the establishment. That is a remarkable thing. And so people have to realize that as you're going through that process, you're constantly going to have to continue raising your game and raising your game and raising your game.
Yeah.
But none of that changes the fact, that the people of Colorado were disenfranchised.
One of the reasons I think that people are disenfranchised is because they are not sure about the policy, Stephen. Let me get to policy for a moment, because we keep talking about sort of the things on the outskirts and not necessarily policy. We had Maya McGinnis on last week. She's from the Committee for a Responsible Budget. And she said Donald Trump's plan in terms of wiping away $19 trillion in debt in the next 8 years does not add up. She said that the tax plan is incredibly costly. Now, you're his senior policy guy, Stephen. I'd like you to take us through his economic plan and how it leads to creating jobs and how he expects to eliminate $19 trillion in debt in 8 years.
Right. Well, one of the most important things to understand about our debt situation and about our deficit situation is that it's welfare spending primarily that is the largest item in the federal budget. You add up all the different welfare programs, it's about $1 trillion a year, including state contributions to those programs. More than we spend on Medicare, more than we spend on Social Security, way more than we spend on defense. Getting people back to work off of welfare will do more to reduce the deficit than any other single program you could imagine. And so if you reduce the tax burden substantially and the regulatory burden substantially, and you keep jobs and wealth in America, and you bring back overseas capital, and then on top of that, you change our trade deals to create a full employment economy, you're going to save hundreds of billions of dollars a year just on welfare expenditures alone, not even counting the trillions of dollars you're going to get in new revenue. So I think that economic recipe is going to do more than anybody else to reduce and ultimately pay down the debt.
So what kind of growth would you expect then from the economy? Because Maya McGinnis, when she was doing the numbers, she said, look, in order to get these numbers to materialize, you need 16% economic growth. Is that the kind of projections you have, 16% economic growth? We're at 2%.
No, we're not forecasting 16% economic growth. But I do think that this is a very big difference between us and Senator Cruz. Maybe one of the most important differences. Senator Cruz is a demagogic supporter of cheaper goods are always better. If China can devalue their currency, bring something in cheaper, that's good. But what Ted Cruz doesn't understand is that growth is driven in part by net exports. The gap between how much we're exporting and how much we're importing. Right now, that gap is nearly $1 trillion a year. That's subtracting, depending on what estimate you look at, a full percentage point from GDP year after year after year after year after year. It's not a coincidence that the slow growth era really began in 2001 after China entered the World Trade Organization, and we began seeing this huge spike in our annual trade deficit. Nor is it a coincidence that last quarter we had anemic 1% growth, and we also notched in 2015 our largest ever trade in goods deficit with China.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephen. And you've been so articulate in terms of the issues around immigration, which is why I want to stay on trade for a moment here, because most people out there would say, look, free trade creates economic growth. How do you push back to those people that are questioning your stance on, for example, the Trans-Pacific Pipeline, Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP trade deal?
Right, and to me this is the difference between demagoguery and ideology versus fact-based reasoning. We have decades of data to review in looking at our trade deals. So, for instance, in the late 1960s, you can look at the share of people who are working, and then you can compare that to today. So the percentage of men aged 25 to 54 who are not working has tripled since the late 1960s, when we began offshoring jobs, and that really, of course, spiked big time after NAFTA and after China. And then you can also look at wages. Wages have been stagnant really for 4 decades now. The middle class is also 10 percentage points smaller than it was in 1970. So metric after metric after metric, you've seen a shrinking and a stalling of the middle class. If our current trade ideology worked, you would think that you would see that in the conditions of working people. Instead, the opposite has happened. Who's the economic powerhouse, by contrast, in Europe? Germany. What does Germany do? Germany maintains a strong manufacturing base. Is there any German today who says, I wish we had sent all of our manufacturing to China?
Right.